I keep hearing from people about the release of this Snyder Cut of the Justice League. I keep seeing other YouTube channels laud it as this amazing win for the fans. First off, my opinion about the Snyder DC films isn't the point.
Boys, Bruce Wayne meets Clark Kent. I love it.
Your opinion isn't the point. The fact that the fan base is so divided about these films and you and I disagree about them, that's the point. Whether you love them or hate them, there's no way you can say these movies from Man of Steel to Justice League are universally loved, nor can you claim these films are archetypal representations of the comics and characters they are based on. These films were polarizing right from the off with 2013's Man of Steel, and aside from a brief respite with Wonder Woman not being a complete departure from the DC mythos, the films continued to divide the DC fan base. 2 years ago, the Fandom Menace YouTube contingent held these films up alongside the latest Star Wars and Star Trek movies as one of the poster children for the destruction of our pop culture myths. And I was in total agreement with that assessment. As Batman vs. Superman desperately attempted to regain lost box office with an almost immediate re-release of a longer director's cut, as Suicide Squad flatlined and Justice League went into a total tailspin toward the ground, it wasn't a debate that the DC cinematic universe was in tatters both critically and commercially. If you think that's not true, explain to me why the leadership at DC was replaced and public statements were made that future DC projects would focus on optimism and reflect the DC Comics characters for the reasons we remember them. My point is, the DC cinematic universe wasn't a runaway success by any measure. They weren't hitting home runs. You can be one of those people that likes these movies all you want, but you'll never change the reality of how these movies were received by the rest of the fan base and the public. And yet now, with the announced release of the Snyder Cut on HBO streaming whatever, many of the same people who saw these Snyder films as having put DC Comics on the ropes are now calling this Snyder Cut a huge win for the fans against the studios.
Liar!
Which fans? Whose win is this?
This is thin, Riggs. This is very thin.
This is anorexic.
This isn't the Sonic the Hedgehog debacle where pretty much everyone hated the design, and the redesign was wanted and loved by the viewing public. The Snyder envisioned DC universe from Man of Steel to Suicide Squad is very much like the Disney Star Wars films from a business perspective. Barring Wonder Woman, which is basically the Rogue One of the Snyder-produced DC universe, each successive entry into Snyder's vision continued to erode the goodwill and profitability of the series. And the situation became so dire that Warner Brothers demanded immediate triage and a purging of the leadership for the franchise. So I ask again, who's winning here? This isn't some major victory for disenfranchised ticket buyers. Quit fooling yourselves. The reason Justice League failed is because Snyder was at the helm and drove that cinematic universe into the ground. Whedon's attempts to fix it were folly because the movie was already crafted mostly by Snyder himself. There comes a point where the only way to fix a film is to start over, and they didn't have that option. This Snyder Cut release is a Hail Mary play by a faceless corporation during a pandemic to drum up interest in their streaming service because they can't put movies in theaters right now. To sit here on YouTube after years of rightly calling out the Snyder DC universe as a nihilistic destruction of some of our most treasured modern myths, and now recouch this as a huge victory for fans, is at best delusional and at worst manipulative.
Are you crazy? Is that your problem?
It really seems to me like some of these channels have lost the plot where the Snyder Cut is involved. It's the equivalent of, say, living in the early 2000s and they announce a cinematic sequel to Star Trek Voyager, and the internet calls it a massive win for Trek fans. Are we really going to pretend Star Trek Voyager was universally loved? No, we aren't, because we know it wasn't. And the same goes here with Snyder's vision for the DC universe.
Don't you want to help me realize my vision?
Your work is puerile and underdramatized. You lack any sense of structure.
character are the Aristotelian unities.
If Snyder's vision had been amazing and massive successes from Man of Steel all the way to Suicide Squad, there wouldn't have been the complete leadership turnover at Warner Brothers. Period. It's your choice if you want to champion this announcement, but don't lie about what it is. This isn't a victory for the fans. Snyder wasn't robbed of his vision by the studio. He had 2 of his own very high-profile chances to make his vision for this cinematic universe work, and he had 2 others that he had creatively produced with other directors. His vision couldn't stick the landing. It's that simple. This is only a victory for a very vocal and vociferous minority of DC fans that happen to be Snyder movie fans, and they have no problem watching our modern myths get trashed. Aside from cinematography and humor levels, there's no difference between Snyder and Taika Waititi, and we'd all do well to remember that.